privacy doesn't have to be all or nothing. The inability to attain extreme levels of privacy shouldn't deter one from taking any protective measures at all. There exists a concept of just enough. We have to take a balanced approach to mitigating risk. And here's your host, Ray Heffer, a cybersecurity expert bringing you practical advice on securing your digital life.
Okay, welcome back. This is episode 14. This is The Lockdown, the Practical Privacy and Security podcast. Now, I'd like to touch on social media. I actually had an email from a listener, so thank you for the email. You know who you are, and thank you for the kind words. And you actually mentioned the kids' privacy piece in the podcast last week. I actually feel like I've barely scraped the surface of kids and privacy, so I think more to come on that. But back to social media, I really have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn in particular, and a hate relationship pretty much with every other piece of social media out there. Like many of you, I maintain a LinkedIn profile because, unfortunately, it's expected from many organisations looking to hire talent, but also the clients that I work with. That said, my strategy is simply to remain in control of what information is out there. I have the full assumption that anything I put on LinkedIn, private or not, or any social media for that matter, will be harvested and used by data brokers and other malicious purposes. But this also presents an opportunity for misinformation too. Just be careful how you do it. Now, recently I did some experimentation and started blocking out or redacting parts of text on my LinkedIn profile. If you have a Windows PC, it's Alt 219 to hold the Alt key and just type 219. You will get a block, so you can start redacting text. On Linux, I believe it's Control-Shift-U and then it's 2588. But if you just Google ASCII code for full text block or redacted, you'll find what I'm talking about. Now, I got some interesting questions from co-workers asking why parts of my LinkedIn profile was redacted. And this certainly sparked up some conversations around privacy, which was my intent. Now, as a cybersecurity professional, I believe I can get away with it. It's interesting. It sparks up a good conversation into data breaches and how information on social media is then gathered by data brokers out there. There are a lot of AI-powered spam accounts out there. In fact, I touch on this in my latest blog. I'll talk about that later on lockdown.media. My latest blog on AI security mentions this. But there are also data brokers like Zoom Info, and it's actually interesting. After I started redacting text, it was funny to see that same redacted text on the data broker sites, which was quite amusing. My advice with social media is just to control what's out there as much as possible. So no job descriptions, only job titles. And also make sure you set the LinkedIn visibility to private mode. However, I really don't believe that does anything. There are sock puppet accounts that can be created. So a sock puppet is basically a fake account or an alias where you can just look at someone's LinkedIn profile. Now, there are some things you can do where they can't see your photo unless they're connected with you. But always assume that this can be easily bypassed. So only share what you want the world to see. Now, as far as other social media is concerned, honestly, just avoid it. I do have a Twitter account, so it's @privacypod, but honestly, I don't like Twitter, and I'm only using it to promote podcast episodes or blogs. So it's a great way for me to send updates out there of what I'm working on, but I very rarely engage in conversations on there. There's just a lot of nonsense. But privacy aside, when I'm at airports, which is quite a lot recently, every week I'm in an airport somewhere in the United States, I see a mass of people scrolling on their phones, whether they're standing in line to board the flight, whether they're waiting for their coffee outside Starbucks, or even worse, when they're in a cubicle going to the toilet. These people just scroll and scroll and scroll. And you may wonder how I know that last bit. They're also watching YouTube videos. You can hear it in the stall next door. Fine, you do you. For me, I am all about critical thinking and mindfulness. Scrolling on social media, getting that next dopamine hit endlessly for hours in some cases. These people spend such an inordinate amount of time on social media. I do not understand how they get time to do their day job. It's not productive. There's a lot of research that links this to downregulation of the receptors in the brain, especially for dopamine, leading to depression, frustration, anger management issues. It's just not a space I want to go near. But then obviously the privacy aspect, where we all know social media is bad. Now, I did get an email from another listener, so again, thank you to you, asking if I would consider a Mastodon account. I have looked at Mastodon in the past. It's not so much, as I say, as a privacy thing now. Mastodon is a great alternative to Twitter. I agree there, but I really don't have a need for social media in the first place. I use Signal Messenger or Session Messenger to keep in touch with friends and family and co-workers. Social media is more of a place to market what I produce. And for that, I hate to say it, LinkedIn is the best for it. I get more engagement on LinkedIn than any other social media platform I've used. When I post a blog article, for example, I actually get people commenting, saying it's a great read, asking me questions. On Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days, it's just a bunch of nonsense. I get a couple of likes, maybe a retweet, and that's it. I just don't find it engaging. Now, as for photos of myself, I would love to say that I am completely private and you cannot find a single photo of me online. But I would be lying with that being the case. So as part of my day job, I have to do a lot of public speaking. I thoroughly enjoy public speaking, and as a result, many of the event organisers ask for my bio and my photograph. Now, I could, and I have done in the past, given them an avatar, and that has worked on many occasions, but at some of the larger events, think of the RSA Security Conference or Black Hat. I did Zero Trust World in Florida earlier this year. They want my photograph. They have quite strict requirements around that. So the way I manage it is this. I have 2 photos of me that I use. One for my employer, for things like the company directory, and a profile picture which I use for events. But again, it comes back down to my threat model. As a privacy enthusiast, I just want to have anonymity online. I don't want my picture being out there. I have no interest in being famous or anything like that. But there's a professional requirement which is needed. Now, there's also the problem of video content. I've been on a number of podcasts that have recorded video. There's video interviews of me as well that are out there on YouTube. So my picture is pretty much all over the place. Now, I did go through an effort a couple of years ago of removing every photo from me online. It is possible. It can be done. There was a former employer that has a video of me doing an interview that basically has ghosted me and refuses to take that down, even though the content I'm speaking about is heavily outdated now. But I think the result of that is they were acquired by another organisation, Broadcom, and a lot of the people I know and were friends with there who would have had no problem removing that have since moved on. So my advice to you is if you do not need your photograph out there online, you don't need it as part of the professional requirements of your day job, then get rid of it. Use an avatar. If you need some resemblance or likeness, I've talked about this on a previous show before. That was with episode 7. There are face morphing techniques where you can very slightly alter your appearance so it will pass as you, but it's not really you. You've used AI and image generation to morph an AI image that looks somewhat like yours with your own image. Now, I've used that before with things like access to a gym. Looks like you can get through, but it's not really your photograph. And if you're like me and you need a professional headshot associated with your company website or something like that, I know it sucks. But the best thing you can do is have one picture and one picture alone that you control. Now, it goes without saying with any social media, please make sure you enable multi-factor authentication. Now, as I've mentioned, I've completely got rid of Authy. In fact, in episode 12, I talked more about the API abuse that Authy suffered. And I think in many episodes, I've talked about my preferred method of multi-factor authentication, or preferred app, I should say, which is KeePass. I use KeePass XC on my main desktop computer and KeePass DX for Android. I think those two solutions are fantastic. Now, I'm not saying to have the same two-factor authentication codes in your same database. What I'm recommending is you create a separate database with a separate password, a separate PIN if you want that ease of access, and then you sync that with self-hosted solutions, again, which I've talked about, whether that be Nextcloud or something else. Now, again, with social media, especially LinkedIn, they want to know your email address. I have a unique email address that I generate, especially for LinkedIn, and same for Twitter and other social media accounts. And I also cycle that email every 6 months or so. So it's a complete nonsense email. It's just a bunch of numbers. Now, again, I've said this before, I would highly recommend having some custom domains. So just at a very high level, I use Namecheap to register the domains. And then I use Simple Login, which is now part of Proton. So I'm a big fan of Proton and the family of products there, Proton Mail being one of them. Now, Simple Login enables you to create aliases. I've added my custom domains. So I have some generic domains. If you can find a good .com address as well, especially one that's been used before, and you can go to expireddomains.net to find these. And if it's got the word mail in it, even better. So perhaps you can find an old domain, which is, corpspacemail.com, some nonsense like that. But if it's been used for email before, especially if it was used in a corporate environment, unlikely to be blacklisted for spam and things like that. So it's a great catch-all email address, good throwaway alias you can use with Simple Login. Because again, I expect anything in LinkedIn is going to be exposed in a breach, and that will include the email address and also any telephone numbers you associate with the account, which, by the way, I would not do and I have not done. If you do that, make sure you use a VoIP number from MySudo or something similar. Okay, so this next section, I want to discuss briefly OPSEC for OSINT. This is actually a session I'm thinking of doing at a future SANS OSINT summit, should they allow me to. And it's basically operational security for OSINT professionals. When I was at the SANS OSINT summit, and I won't mention names, but there were a few individuals that do OSINT professionally for a living. And I was actually quite surprised that they were using their own devices, even their own mobile devices, with their personal social media accounts to look up the profiles of the target, put it that way. Please do not do that. Now, this is a deep subject. I could talk for hours on it, but for now, let me just go through the basics that you should be doing. So in my last episode 13, I mentioned the complete guide to pfSense for privacy and security. If you're doing OSINT from home, you don't want to be caught out revealing your real IP address. So you want always on VPN for your entire network. Even better, have a dedicated VLAN, a dedicated network just for OSINT investigations. That's behind a VPN and using a different VPN server to what you use day to day. That would be the ideal. Next, and I think this is a non-negotiable, use something like VirtualBox, Parallels, or VMware Workstation, whatever suits you, and run a virtual machine. And it doesn't have to be anything like Kali Linux. You're not doing offensive security or pen testing on this. I personally use Linux. Ubuntu works fine for me, or you can use a Windows machine, whatever suits you. Because this machine is virtual, you're going to install it, do all the updates, put your OSINT tools on there, make sure it's nice and clean, and then you take a snapshot. Now, with VMware Workstation, you have the ability to take a snapshot. So at that point in time, the machine's shut down, it's clean, it's updated, you snapshot it. Each time you do an OSINT investigation, you're looking up social media profiles, you're downloading pictures, you're harvesting information and saving it onto the virtual disk of that virtual machine. Once you're done and you copy that information off, and personally I would put that in a VeraCrypt container, you revert the snapshot back to its clean state. Everything is gone, it's back to as it was. Now this is good hygiene. And on the flip side, ransomware groups, threat actors, they're doing something similar. You may have read in the news recently that VMware ESXi has yet another CVE that ransomware groups are targeting. Basically, if you have domain access and you create an Active Directory domain group called ESXi admins, and you pop yourself in there, or any user in there, anyone gets full admin rights over ESXi. It's pretty bad. That's just one reason threat actors are targeting VMware ESXi servers. But the other reason is they can create a virtual machine, use that for lateral movement across the organization, do their ransom, and then they can delete the VM. Now, the benefit of that is the VM's gone. So all the logs, audit logs, system logs, it's all disappeared. So it makes it very difficult for cyber defenders to do any threat analysis. So back to OSINT. If you run everything in a virtual machine, you can revert to that snapshot and it's always in a clean state. Now, as I said, this subject could go even deeper. There's sock puppet accounts which are needed. I think that warrants an entire conversation on its own. But essentially a sock puppet is an alias or a fake account, let's say on LinkedIn. Now, you want to age an account. You want it to have connections. You want it to look valid because at the end of the day, if you're doing an investigation, you want to look someone up. You need to look up from this sock puppet account. You want many of them. Now, I think the rule should be you don't interact. No connections, no messages, nothing like that. But I'll leave that up to you. And again, you don't ever want to log into this alias account, this sock puppet from your phone, which has a real IP address or traces back to you. You don't want to accidentally log in from your main PC. So again, you do all of that within the OSINT VM, whether that be Windows or Ubuntu, it doesn't matter. And also try and use the same VPN server. And the reasons for that are some social media services may lock you out if you only log in from VPNs all over the world. So you want to maintain a credible story with where you're located and where that VPN server is located. That's going down a rabbit hole I didn't really want to do. It's kind of straying away from the practical side of privacy. But if this is a topic you're interested in, I will let you know in the future should I present this in person. This is probably a good 1 hour discussion. Now, finally, for this show, and this is a short one today, I've just published another blog post on AI security and using locally hosted large language models, or LLMs. If you go to lockdown.media, you'll see my latest blog post. Now, I've been researching AI security and locally hosted AI probably for the past year and a half now. You do need a fairly beefy machine, but for privacy enthusiasts, this is great. I'm sure many of you have played around with OpenAI's ChatGPT. There's Bard, there's Gemini, Anthropic has Claude. But don't believe for 1 second that even if you delete your conversation history, that remains private. I think this is going to result in a whole world of pain when it comes to new data breaches. And I'm just speculating here, but let's say OpenAI is using the conversations for training. This is where you can get PII, or personally identifiable information leakage, through OpenAI's chatbots. In fact, this has happened. There was an incident where people could see other people's chats for a short time. I think that was restricted to a certain region. But you must assume that, again, any conversation you're having with AI now, this is even worse than technically in social media, because people are using this to assess their medical records, and it's very private information. That's going to get leaked. Now, if you run a locally hosted large language model, and my blog post goes into depth on that, this is all self-hosted. It's not connected to the internet. You can be completely offline. The downside is you need some fairly substantial hardware, mainly the GPU. Now, I have an NVIDIA 3080 Ti. It runs video games very well. I'd say it's mediocre at some of these locally hosted LLMs. I'm not saying it's bad, pretty good, but it's certainly not going to compete with OpenAI, ChatGPT, or anything like that. Now, there are a bunch of open source projects like Ollama, Cobalt CPP, Llama-File, Local AI, LM Studio is another one you can download for Windows. There are many of them out there, so my blog post highlights all of those. Now, one of the models I've been experimenting with, and I'm a big fan of, is the OpenHermes 2.5 Mistral. You won't need to spend thousands of dollars on a GPU to run this, and it's pretty capable. In fact, most of what I've been using it for is coding, and it works very, very well. To be honest, AI security is already a vast topic. I break it down into 5 areas. 1, using AI to defend against cyber threats. 2, understanding threats and how threat actors are using AI for malicious intent. And then 3, securing AI systems themselves. So obviously, data privacy is a huge factor there, but also intellectual property leakage and things like that. Number 4, there's the ethical side of AI with security. And then I think number 5, which I don't see mentioned that often, is using AI to assist in OSINT investigations. But if you're using AI, which I know many of you are, you're probably not going to admit it, but if you're using ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, Bard, Gemini, any of those variants, please consider just setting up a locally hosted model with one of those aforementioned tools and stay private. Keep your data self-hosted. Keep your data within the very 4 walls that you sleep in. All right, this is a very short show today. I just wanted to get that out there. Please keep the emails coming in. I do like reading those. It's lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com. If you have any topic ideas for future shows, I know I had someone write in asking me about my home lab, so I'm going to cover that in a future episode. Any other ideas? Feel free to email me, and whatever you do with the rest of your week, have a good one.